On June 25, 2022, 13-month-old Traveon Hughes Jr. was rushed to the hospital because he was in distress and needed urgent medical help. But unfortunately, hours after he got to the hospital, he died. The cause of his death was so mysterious that it left everyone confused. A medical examination uncovered that the infant had a baby wipe pushed deep into his throat. The question then became, how did it get there? Who forced a baby wipe down the throat of a 13-month-old infant? All fingers immediately pointed at no other person than the child's biological father, Traveon Hughes Sr., who was just 18 years old at the time. He was the one who was left alone with Traveon Hughes Jr. Although the state of Ohio believes that baby Traveon's death was an intentional homicide and found him to be guilty of the crime, his girlfriend and mother of the deceased child continue to support her boyfriend, even as she blames the state for her son's death. This is the disturbing yet confusing case of Traveon Hughes Sr. and his 13-month-old son, who never got the chance to call him daddy. Traveon Hughes Sr. is a Cleveland native who was born in 2004 and raised in Ohio. Although more information has not been publicly made known about Traveon Sr.'s background, it is believed that he might be from a low-income household. He basically grew up with his mother, siblings, and the occasional presence of his father, who was alleged to be largely absent due to his own struggles with addiction and legal troubles. Traveon Hughes' early life might have been marked by financial struggles, with his family relying on government assistance programs to make ends meet, and his mother working multiple jobs to provide for her children. It is, however, important to note that these are just speculations about his background. Despite the challenges, Traveon Hughes' mother encouraged his education, and he attended Cleveland public schools, where he got several complaints because of his behavioral issues and struggles in the classroom, which led to him not following up in school. Because of his situation at the time, Traveon Hughes Sr. worked odd jobs to support himself and his family, including stints at fast food restaurants and construction sites, but his employment was sporadic and often tumultuous. It was hard for him to actually hold on to a job. In 2021, Traveon Hughes' girlfriend, Esteven became pregnant with their son, Traveon Hughes Jr. According to most people who knew the couple, their relationship was marked by frequent arguments and instability. It isn't clear whether the financial crisis was the main problem or if it was just the regular couple troubles, but it would later be stated that his girlfriend Esteven, who also had to work, would often seek support from her family and friends, so most likely they struggled financially. The challenges were obvious, and the anger issues Traveon had didn't make it easier for them. Traveon Hughes Sr. and his girlfriend were in Chicago at the time, close to the birth of their child. Traveon tried to look for a way out of the financial crisis he faced, but it is suspected that he might have turned to not-so-legal means, and he often got himself into more trouble. Traveon didn't exactly live the life of an 18-year-old, and although things were tough, he and Esteven still looked forward to the birth of the child. Esteven, his girlfriend, was and still is very young. Although there is not so much information about her background or current life, she certainly had the support of her family. They were always available and intentional about her safety and that of the child, so they made sure she received regular prenatal care throughout her pregnancy. However, at only 24 weeks of gestation, Esteven's water broke, and she was rushed to the hospital, where she underwent an emergency delivery due to concerns about the baby's health and well-being and, in extension, her own. Traveon Hughes Jr. was born prematurely in March of 2022, weighing just 1 pound 10 ounces and measuring 13 inches long. He spent several weeks in the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU, before being discharged home. A newborn child needs all the care and financial support he can get, so Esteven had to return to work immediately, considering the financial status of her baby's father. She sure couldn't take the newborn to work, so his dad had to cover up while she worked. But for this to happen, they all had to go back to Cleveland. It is unstated why she had to work in Cleveland, but they made the decision, and after baby Traveon was discharged from the hospital, they all moved to Cleveland. Back in Cleveland, the plan was for Traveon Sr. to fill up the space, enabling his girlfriend to work. On the first and second days, things seemed to go according to plan, but what transpired the third day after their return is still shocking, and to most people, unbelievable. On the morning of June 25, 2022, Esteven left for work, leaving 13-year-old Traveon Hughes Jr. with his father. She left their residence near West 81st Street and Madison Avenue in Cleveland after probably attending to the child that morning. Unknown to her, that would be the last time she would ever set eyes on her baby. Traveon Hughes Sr. was alone with his child, but shortly after, things changed. According to him, he left the child in the sitting room to attend to some things in the room, and when he got back, he noticed his child was experiencing some difficulties and was even choking, so he called the police. Cleveland EMS responded to the scene immediately, and upon their arrival, they met Traveon Hughes Jr. alive but in serious distress. He was choking really hard, and it was obvious he had an obstruction in his throat. They immediately went ahead to perform emergency life-saving measures, but when he didn't seem to improve, the child was immediately rushed to the nearest hospital for better help. Doctors tried their best, and in the process, a very rare discovery was made. They learned that baby Traveon had been choking because he had a baby wipe in his throat. They found this to be unusual, but still, the doctors fought to save baby Traveon. Unfortunately, innocent and helpless Traveon Hughes Jr. was eventually pronounced dead at Metro Health Medical Center, where he was earlier rushed to. According to the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office, the cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation due to a foreign object being inserted into the infant's airway. But if it was intentional or an accident, no one knew. The cause of death was rather unusual, and there were just too many questions surrounding it. Immediately, homicide detectives were assigned to look into the matter. The Cleveland Division of Police arrived at the hospital to collect evidence and begin their investigations. They asked his father, Traveon Hughes Sr., who was in the hospital, and he explained that he left baby Traveon in the sitting room to get his cell phone, and when he was back, he noticed that he was choking. Traveon Hughes Sr. was arrested on the 29th of June 2022, as he was the only one with the child. When his girlfriend left for work that morning, the child was healthy, so he only had to answer the questions. He was the only suspect. When he was asked if he killed the child and why he did it, he gave answers that were hard to believe. He first pleaded not guilty, before going on to explain his own side of the story. According to him, after his girlfriend Esteven left the house, he took the child and held him in the living room, but then he remembered that he had to tend to his old wounds, so he placed a baby wipe on the child's chest because the child was holding up his own formula and feeding himself with his bottle. He added that he dropped Traveon Jr. to lie down in the living room and went to the bedroom to tend to the wounds he sustained a few months back when he was shot 19 times back in Chicago. When he came out, he saw the child alive but noticed that he wasn't comfortable. Traveon Jr. was choking, so he immediately called 911 for help. When asked how the wipes he claimed he dropped on the child's chest ended up in his throat, Traveon said the unthinkable. The 18-year-old father thought it was wise to accuse his child of his own death. Traveon Sr. claimed the child took the wipe from his chest and put it in his mouth while he was in the other room. His response left people in shock because baby Traveon was 3 months old, but he was even smaller than a 3-month-old baby because he was born prematurely. The child couldn't roll, grab, or crawl, but somehow he was accused of putting wipes in his mouth. Also, the fact that the wipe was rolled, balled up, and pushed deep into the child's throat made his story even more unbelievable. After further investigations by the Cleveland Division of Police, CDP, and the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office, it was determined that the baby was too young to have placed the wipe in his throat. It was then concluded that the wipe was intentionally pushed in to suffocate and deliberately kill the child, so the matter was ruled a homicide by asphyxiation. Traveon Hughes Sr. was subsequently indicted on charges of aggravated murder, and endangering a child. Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court Judge William McGinty set sentencing for Friday, which was May 31st, 2024 by 10:30 a.m. After a week-long trial, Traveon Hughes Sr. appeared in court on the said date to hear his sentencing. Traveon had been charged with murder, involuntary manslaughter, and 2 counts of endangering a child. His attorney, W. Scott Ramsey, was present to see if the outcome would be better than most expected. That day, it was repeated that Traveon Jr. was born prematurely in March 2022 in Chicago, where Traveon Hughes Sr. lived at the time. Due to his condition, the baby spent several weeks in the neonatal intensive care unit before being discharged. That was when Traveon Hughes Sr. and his girlfriend Esteven moved to Cleveland with the boy, 2 days before his tragic end. It is important to note that when Traveon Hughes took the stand in his defense during the trial, he maintained his own part of the story, claiming that his 13-week-old son shoved the wipe in his own mouth, and that the baby was also the one that balled it up and pushed it deep into his throat. When Assistant Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Carrie Sowell was permitted to speak, She brought evidence and a detailed explanation with her. She offered jurors photographs and videos of Traveon Jr. in the weeks before his death. They showed the boy with milk spilling out of his mouth while he tried to drink from a bottle. She argued about how a tiny baby could feed himself and also went on to deliberate on how small his hands were and how it was impossible for him to put the wipe in his mouth. In her words, she said, "Look at his little hands and ask yourself if he was able to grab that wipe, ball it up, and put it in his mouth." She went on to acknowledge that Traveon has refused to accept that he did evil to his child. Instead, he was blaming other people. He blamed the hospital and even blamed late baby Traveon for his own death. Prosecutor Sowell Carey also concluded by saying that the more likely scenario was that Traveon Hughes, who had just moved on his own to Cleveland from Chicago with the baby 2 days earlier, grew stressed by the baby's constant crying. She then continued that the only way Traveon Hughes Sr. could shut the baby up and keep him quiet was to put something in his mouth, but unfortunately, it went a little bit too far. Traveon Hughes' attorney, W. Scott Ramsey, trying to defend Traveon Sr., told jurors that no testimony in the week-long trial stated that Traveon Hughes Sr. stuffed the wipe in the baby's mouth. This was clearly overlooked as the state's case instead focused on the words of 2 doctors, including the pathologist who conducted the baby's autopsy. The doctors testified that they did not believe that the average child in Traveon's age and condition would be developmentally advanced enough to be able to get the wipe lodged in his throat on his own. However, Traveon Hughes' attorney, W. Scott Ramsey, pointed out that 3 people, including the ex-girlfriend of Traveon Hughes' senior brother, who is baby Traveon's uncle, testified that the boy was able to pick up objects and put them in his mouth. In his words, he said, "I find it arrogant that people who never met Traveon Jr. can say what he could and couldn't do." Attorney W. Scott Ramsey also added that accidents happen, and in this case, it was a clear accident. He tried to sympathize with the accused, Traveon Hughes Sr., by saying, "It's a parent's worst nightmare to lose a child." And to add to that, now he's being charged with murder. This, however, wasn't reason enough, as the prosecutor, Sowell Carey, countered Ramsey's points. The prosecutor said that if Traveon Hughes' claims that the boy was advanced enough to put things in his mouth were true, then it was reckless to leave him alone with a wipe on his chest, and that recklessness is not justified enough not to face justice. Traveon Hughes Sr.'s testimony on the trials was also recounted in court. Basically, his explanation was that he placed a wipe there to replace a bib spoiled with milk that had gone out of the mouth of the child who was feeding himself with his bottle. He left the room for a short period to tend to wounds he suffered in a December 2021 incident in Chicago in which he was shot 19 times in the legs and body. Traveon Hughes continued by saying that he did not think that his son would try to swallow the wipe. He said it was a mistake and didn't think it was going to get to the point of his child swallowing the wipe and eventually dying. He went on by saying that he is a father, a very young father, and that he is still learning the acts of taking care of a child and the things to avoid. He claimed he was still learning how and what to protect a baby from. Traveon Hughes also said that he is now afraid to use wipes because he is traumatized by his son's death. He said he might never get to touch wipes again. "I lost my son. The fact that they're trying to say I did this hurts me." Those were the finalizing statements of Traveon Hughes Sr. Meanwhile, prosecutor Sowell Carey highlighted the discrepancies between Traveon Hughes' Wednesday testimony and his prior statements to homicide detectives and a doctor in the court's psychiatric clinic. Aside from the fact that it is sad, everything just doesn't seem to make sense. At first, Traveon Hughes told detectives that he left the baby alone for 1 or 2 seconds to run to another room to grab his cell phone. But his testimony later changed. He said in the latter interview that he was gone for anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, different from the story he gave the first time. Surprisingly, his story still changed when he stood on trial. On the stand that Wednesday, he said he couldn't remember how long he had been gone because he had to tend to his own wounds. Prosecutor Sowell Carey continued by saying that if at all he was telling the truth, then his testimonies would be the same. The truth never changes. Traveon Hughes' testimony at trial also included bizarre moments where Sowell Carey peppered him with questions about whether he had ever smoked marijuana. She also asked about what kind of people he associated with as a teenager in Chicago and listed the names of women he had chatted with online while he was in jail awaiting trial. The answers he gave to these questions have not been posted online and are still not available to the public. But the later outcome of the interrogation seemed to back up the fact that Traveon Hughes Sr. was indeed responsible for cutting the life of his infant child short. In prosecutor Sewell Carey's closing arguments, she pointed jurors to a single moment in the body camera video of Traveon Hughes' interview with detectives at the hospital. She explained how it shows the moment Traveon Hughes was fiddling with a tissue in his hand, a gesture she claims suggests tension and fear of the truth. She said, "He opened his hand and it was balled up," Sewell said. "I submit to you that's what he did with the baby wipe, and then he shoved it down his son's throat." Traveon Hughes declined to speak when given the opportunity at his sentencing. Instead, the defense attorney said that he would not be making any statements that day, but would exercise his constitutional right and lawful right to an appeal. But then he still maintains his innocence, claiming that he did not recklessly or purposely shove a baby wipe into his baby's mouth. He says he didn't do it, and he stands by that. "We value the jury's verdict, but we just disagree with it." That was the closing statement for defense attorney W. Scott Ramsey. The sentencing was going to come from Ohio state law, and it also gave the opportunity for victim impact statements. 2 people from the family of the deceased child who joined the court via Zoom were allowed to speak. The first person was the father of Asiona McEwen, who sounded really troubled. After introducing himself, he went on to explain how bad he felt about the tragic news of the passing of his grandchild. He talked about moments that he would never get to experience with the late Traveon Jr. He mentioned how he wouldn't be able to take him to school, to the park, or to play with his grandson anymore, all because an irresponsible father cut his life short. Asiona's father ended his statements by saying he wished that the court would bring justice to his grandson and that the accused be punished for his bad deeds. The second person to speak was the brother of Traveon Sr.'s father, who was also an uncle to Traveon Hughes Sr. He spoke about how cruel it was to do that to a little child. He continued by saying that even when he doesn't wish jail time upon his enemies, he really does wish it upon his brother's son. He said that Traveon Sr. doesn't deserve to breathe the fresh air, be free, or see the broad daylight, and he ended by asking the court to do justice to the deceased. It was now time for the sentencing. The jurors went on to deliberate for about 3 hours, and when they were done, they proceeded to sentence Traveon. Now 20-year-old Traveon Hughes Sr., who was obviously scared, turned and looked at his mother at the back of the courtroom when the verdict was read. His defense attorney W. Scott Ramsey shook his head as he knew it was a failure. The jury found Traveon Hughes Sr. guilty of not just murder but also aggravated murder and child engagement, and with that, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole until he had already served 15 years in prison. When it was time for the mother of the deceased child to speak, she said something very unexpected that left everyone in shock. When she came to the stand, she simply said the state was wrong, the judgment was wrong, and the court was wrong. She blamed the state and said that they knew what they did to her child and that they weren't going to get away with it before she went back to her seat. She was taking sides with her boyfriend, claiming that he was innocent. After giving her very short speech, just as she was walking back to her seat, her father, who was still present via Zoom, spoke out, telling her not to support Traveon Hughes Sr. because he was the one who killed her baby. Apparently, some family members of both Asiona McEwen and Traveon Hughes Sr. were accusing the state of hiding information and killing baby Traveon. They claimed that it was the first paramedics who attended to baby Traveon that killed him. They claimed the state was trying to cover it up because it would make them look bad and incompetent. Moving on, the judge told Traveon he could appeal the sentence, and Traveon accepted. His attorney told the court that he had agreed to appeal the case. The judge, however, closed the proceedings by explaining to Traveon Hughes Sr. his duties and the correctional facility he would be taken to. All the while, Traveon sat still. Eventually, Traveon was escorted out of the courtroom, and his girlfriend, who was also on her way out, said in a bold voice, asking Traveon to hang in there and be strong and that they were going to get through everything. Her actions were a surprise to everyone present, as it would be generally expected that she, more than anyone else present in court, would want justice to be served because she was the mother of the victim. Instead, she supported her boyfriend, who had already been found guilty and was already convicted. A case like this begs the question of whether the couple was too young to have a child. Both teenagers had no idea what they were doing, and young Traveon paid the ultimate price for it. However, it is still debatable if it was intentional or just a mere accident. While this is sad, it is important to understand that children should be treated with extreme care and kept with an overly trusted person. With that said, we have come to the end of this video. Thank you for watching this video to the end. You have surely learned a thing or two. Let us know in the comment section what your thoughts are about the case. Was it really an accident? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you in our next video. Bye.